Hello, everyone. I'm Hailey. I'm a registered clinical counselor. I am in the Okanagan in BC, Canada. I'm really excited to join everyone today. As always, please feel free to share anything that you would like to connect with others in the chat about. If you have a question at any time, please ask, because that's one of the best things about this experience is being able to connect with one another. And today our topic is going to be just like an overview of some wonderful skills around DBT. And so DBT is Dialectical Behavioural Therapy. So Dialectical Behavioural Therapy was a therapy that was created by Marsha Linehan back in many years ago now, before my birth. But she basically, unfortunately, was struggling with borderline personality disorder. And if you want to know a little bit more about borderline personality disorder, last week our discussion was on the different personality disorders that are classified within the DSM. So feel free to check that one out. But she basically realized that within her own work within the psychology field, that with her struggling within borderline, that standardized other treatments weren't really just as effective for her. So she would try to do things like cognitive behavioral therapy or different alternate forms of modalities, and she found like it just wasn't quite right. So she set off on a quest, perhaps, and decided to branch out into and create a new type of therapy that goes off the same kind of premise as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what we do affects how we feel and what we think. And she kind of just really honed in on that and really developed some really wonderful skills that really help individuals to manage a lot of intense emotions. And I think we've all been there where we've had some really deep, heavy emotions that are really uncomfortable. And she realized that we just need some better skills and paradigms to better deal with these distresses. But I do want to just say hi to everyone that's joining in the chat. I see people rolling in, which is wonderful. Welcome. Please, again, share what you would like to or any questions. And but yeah, let's kick it off. So within dialectical behavioral therapy, as you may see, there are 4 different areas. And so we're going to break down each of those areas and really talk about some different skills that are within those 4 different areas. So what's really great, interesting, and what I like about this photo here is that it lists mindfulness first. And actually within dialectical behavioral therapy, distress tolerance generally happens first. But I agree with this photo because I think before we can even manage distress, I think we have to be mindful and aware that that distress is happening. So I would agree with that as well. So what I mean by mindfulness is the ability to be present in the moment without judgment. So if you think about it, our awareness is within our conscious mind, right? Within our brains. And it's almost like an elastic. So the more that we are able to be aware of our elastic in our mind and stretch it to different experiences, whether that's the experience of what our bodies are feeling like, or stretch it to the environment that we're around or the things that are happening, the more that we can be present in that experience. But we don't want to stretch our awareness outside of the moment that we're existing in. So right now, today is Thursday afternoon, early evening, and that's the moment that we're in. We're not stretching our awareness into the future or into the past. We're only allowing it to be present totally in this moment. So that's the one part. And we can do that through a few different ways. We can do that through being aware of our ability to notice our senses. So that would be something like our taste, our touch, our smell, what we hear. And we also can do that within our inner experience. I know this sounds weird, but if we all have hearts in our chests. And so if we were to put our hand on our heart, we could even notice what it feels like for our heart to beating. That could be an opportunity to have mindfulness and being present within our body as well. So mindfulness kind of was from a variation of meditation, and that meditation has been around for a long time. It really came from a lot of Eastern practices from the world, and they were integrated into more of a mindfulness approach because it says that we can do that more consistently. Like meditation, generally you would be more still with it, and not that you aren't still in some regard within mindfulness, but it's just like a little bit of a way of a practice. It's a way of being. It's a way of existing rather than just an item or an action that we do. If we're truly mindful and we highlight that ability, then we can use it more regularly and becomes more effective. So that's kind of the part 1, is like the ability to be present in the moment. The part 2 of mindfulness is without judgment. So I always say to people, I'm like, okay, so for example, here is a sticky pad, right? I always say to people, can you please tell me what this is? And they go, okay, it's a really nice pinky orange post-it note. I'm like, okay, great. So you did do some observation there that it is a post-it pad, right? But you did make a judgment when you said it was nice, because that's where we make a judgment, is where we make an inference or an appraisal of a thing, and we determine whether it's a variation of good or bad. And so if we were truly just to observe this, we could say that this post-it note is about, like, I don't know, about the size of my palm. And we could say, like, depending on our judgment, right, we could say it's either like pink or it's orange. But that again is up to some judgment as well. When we step out of observation, we step into judgment. And when we're in judgment, generally there's a lot of negative emotional experiences that could happen if we're judging it to be negative specifically. If we judge something to be wonderful, like, oh, what a wonderful sticky pad, then you generally would have a great emotional response to that. But if you were to judge something as really bad, we would generally then have an emotional response of some sort of uncomfortable emotion. And the reason I'm being so annoying with these post-it notes is to make that point that when we're present in the moment and we're judging, we're opening ourselves up to a negative emotional response, which is what Marsha Linehan really started to notice. She really noticed that if we are judgmental of things in our environment in an unhelpful, critical way, we're more likely to feel more negative. And she was like, if we want to hone the ability to regulate these intense emotions that we have, especially for individuals suffering from borderline personality disorder, that we would want to give them the tools to step out of their judgment mind into a place of compassion, into a place of being present, into a place of being more neutral and rolling with the punches instead of being completely swept away by them. So let's now apply this to a life situation. So say, let's try to think of an example. Say someone gave you a gift, right? And you look at that gift, and to be mindful in that moment, you would want to go, oh, this person is giving me a gift. Like, you would describe it really factually. If then you were to step into judgment, you would make a judgment like, maybe the gift isn't really that great. So you might be like, hey, this is a really awful gift. And you might feel really disappointed because it's your birthday and you're hoping for something else. And then you would have a negative emotional reaction from that. Versus if you were to describe it more factually and really be present, and you would notice what the gift looks like, what it feels like to hold the gift, and be really present in that moment, you're less likely to have that wave of negative emotional response. So that's why I really agree with that photo that lists mindfulness is the first section within DBT, because I think that regardless of whether we master the other sections within DBT, mindfulness within itself is a wonderful skill that we can all use in different situations to allow us to have a lot more sense of control. Because if you think about it, I was listening a different podcast this morning with Brene Brown, and she really brought up these really wonderful ideas that as human beings, especially with everything that's happened in the world and how we're returned to in-person work in many areas, or we've tried to re-navigate social relationships, as human beings, we always want to feel a sense of control. That allows us to feel really safe. It allows us to feel really centered, to really just be at ease and feel happy. But she really made a good point that it's actually not possible ever to be fully in control, because we can't, it's impossible. But through the practice of mindfulness, you are deliberately choosing to experience the reality that you want to have. And what I mean by that is the judgment piece. Am I going to choose to judge this in an unhelpful way? And of course, like when it comes to safety, like when you come up to a crosswalk, you should make a judgment that I need to look both ways, like obvious things like that. Don't want to get hit by a car, heaven forbid. But outside of that, it's just about the social relationships we have. Or another example might be, you get a promotion at work, but the job has some extra responsibilities that are really stressing you out. You're getting to really, really feel anxious about these extra responsibilities. The thing is like, if we look at those extra responsibilities and we judge them as a negative thing because of the more work that you have to do, no wonder you're stressed out. No wonder you're overwhelmed. And this is not an optimistic thing that you're wanting to engage in. But instead, if we mindfully be present in the moment and go, what am I feeling in my body? What am I noticing in the situation? What can I take in through my senses of information? And how could I maybe be more neutral? How could I look at this as an observation? And we could say, instead of a judgment as a negative thing, we could just say, you know what, factually, I got a promotion. And that is a lot more easier to manage from an emotional standpoint than it is looking at it of the overwhelming work that you have to do. And if you feel optimistic and you're more open to it, you could try and judge it in a positive way. Wow, look at all the other experiences I'm going to be able to have, what I'm going to learn. Maybe I'm getting a raise, like all the other wonderful things that could come from that promotion. So I hope that kind of really cements that idea around mindfulness, because a lot of people are like, mindfulness, it's so hokey, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. You can have your judgment on mindfulness, but in reality, right, it's a really wonderful skill that can show us that we do have a sense of control in the way that we experience things, even though situationally we have a lot of lack of control in many ways. So I want to just maybe share a few more mindfulness skills that we can use to kind of emphasize that point. So if you think about it, opposites of mindful moments are mindless moments. So maybe a moment where you are driving and you don't really remember your ride home or the car experience, or when you have a conversation and you suddenly realize that you don't know what anyone was saying, or you miss what the other person was sharing. Or maybe when you're reading and you realize that you have to start back at the top of the page because you did not really pay attention to what you're reading. Those are the examples of not really stretching your awareness to the present moment. It's showing you that your mind is occupied with other things. And so we can do practices to help us get back into that present moment. So what we could do, for example, would be we can notice our breath, right? We can really go like, what does it feel like to take a big, deep breath? Not a sigh, but a really big, deep breath. The other ones we could do is we could focus on a single moment. So right now it's 18 minutes after the hour, and what's happening in this moment, right? I'm listening to Hailey talk about mindfulness. I'm listening to noticing what it feels like to maybe be sitting or standing or wherever I am right now. We could also do it to possibly imagine like what it would be like to be in our favorite environment or in nature, stuff like that. Those allows us to really focus more presently in the moment without judgment. So that would be like one of the first sections within DBT. So as we move along, we can go into the distress tolerance skills. So what it means to have distress tolerance is that, this is going to sound a little harsh, but we're all going to suffer in our life. Like we're all going to have some sort of distress in our life that's going to happen, whether it's emotional, physical, socially, whatever it may be. And to be able to experience distress in a more helpful way, we have to have some acceptance that distress is going to happen. And we need to be able to have some tolerance of that distress. So I know it sounds really kind of like, oh, that's really insensitive, but it's like, if you are in a heightened emotional state and that you're experiencing distress and you immediately push it away, you're not going to allow yourself to fully process that experience. You're not going to be able to learn from that experience. You're not going to be able to have ability to think of clarity of how to move forward out of that uncomfortable experience. You're going to end up just really stuck in that distress. So the first step within it is having acceptance of the distress. And then what we can do is other different skills to make that distress more tolerable, and so that we can tolerate more easy. And often, and unfortunately, individuals may struggle with their distress and deal with it in some unhelpful ways. That might be whether it's substance abuse, right? Or it may be self-harm, or it may be avoiding our challenges or our struggles. And those are like the more unhelpful ways of managing with. There's no shame or judgment in that, because they do provide relief to some extent. But we want to transition out of unhelpful ways to manage distress towards more helpful ways of managing distress. So, for example, what we can do is we can learn how to improve the moment that we're in within the distress. So we can do that through some small distractions, so we can get busy, right? So if we're feeling a lot of distress, we can do an activity that's healthy for us, such as exercise, deep breathing, journaling, those sorts of things. I always suggest to individuals who are struggling with maybe some self-harm to mitigate that self-harm through a more, or like a less hurtful, physically hurtful way of doing that. So for example, holding an ice cube. Like if you think about it, holding an ice cube isn't going to actually do any damage to your skin. It's going to be really cold. It's going to be really uncomfortable, but it's going to allow you to mitigate that energy instead of self-harm into a way that's going to be more manageable. I'm not saying we all should grab ice cubes every time we are in an uncomfortable emotion, but sometimes distress tolerance is finding a more like a less dangerous way of managing our distress or being able to tolerate it through distraction or things like that. So that would be a couple different ways within that. And what we'd also want to do is throughout the day is spend many times checking in with ourselves and asking ourselves if there's a skill that we need to manage our distress more effectively. So if you kind of notice in that sentence, we're building off of mindfulness. We're building in the ability to be present in the moment, to notice how we're feeling, and then manage the distress that we're acknowledging through being present in the moment. So I thought we might do a little relaxation exercise. So I'm going to lead us through this, and I hope that will kind of be a little exercise for us to try that you can take away as a skill. And it's called a cue controlled relaxation. So a cue controlled relaxation is a quick and easy technique that will help you to reduce your stress levels and your muscle tension. So a cue is a trigger or command that helps you to relax. In this case, your cue might be a word like relax or peace or calm, whatever you may want it to be. And the goal of this technique is to train your body to release muscle tension when you think about your cue word. So initially, you may have to just really follow along with this instructions, right? But I want you to kind of everyone to pick a word that you may feel like you really connect with, and feel free to share it in the chat if you want to give some inspiration to others. So if this is something that we're going to try today, but generally speaking, you would want to practice it regularly to increase the effectiveness of it. So once you've picked your cue word, I want you to make sure to get comfortable wherever you are. Feel free to sit down if you'd like. And after you've practiced this exercise, you'll be able to do it wherever you are without having to be as attention focused. So I want you to be able to sit maybe ideally with your feet flat on the floor and your head resting, your hands resting comfortably either on your side or on your arms in your lap. And I want you to close your eyes if you will. And I want you to allow yourself to take a long, slow breath in through your nose, if you can, and allow your belly to expand and feel what that feels like. So we're toning into our mindfulness, into our bodies. And I want you to hold that breath for a couple seconds, whatever is comfortable for you. And I want you to allow that breath to leave your body. And as that breath leaves your body, I want you to feel your belly collapse like a balloon, loosening its air. And do that big, big breath again. And just notice what it feels like to bring that air into your body. Notice what it feels like for the air to enter your nose and go down your windpipe into your lungs and back out again. So I want you to keep your eyes still closed. And I want you to imagine that a white beam of light shines down from the sky like a bright laser and lands on the very top of your head. Notice how warm and soothing the light makes you feel. And this could be a light from above, from the universe, or whatever power makes you feel most comfortable. And as you continue to breathe smoothly, taking slow, long breaths, notice how the light makes you feel more and more relaxed as it continues to shine on the top of your head. Now, slowly, the warm white light begins to spread over the top of your head like a soothing water. And as it does, the light begins to loosen any muscle tension that you're feeling on the top of your head. Slowly, the light begins to slide down your body, and as it moves across your forehead, all of the muscle tension there starts to relax, and it becomes released. Then the white light continues past your ears, the back of your head, your eyes, nose, mouth, and chin, and continues to release any tension that you're holding there. Notice how pleasantly warm your forehead feels. Now slowly imagine that light begins to move down your neck and over your shoulders, releasing any muscle tension. Then the light slowly proceeds down both of your arms, the front and back of your torso, and feel the muscles in your upper and lower back release. Notice that the soothing sensation of the white light as it moves across your chest and stomach. Feel the muscles in your arms release as the light moves down to your forearm and then across both sides of your hands to your fingertips. Notice the light moving down through your pelvis and back and feel your tension being released. Again, I feel the light move more like a soothing water across your upper and lower legs until it spreads and the lower surface of your feet. Feel all of the tension leaving the muscles of your body as the white light makes your body feel warm and relaxed. And continue to notice how peaceful and calm you feel as you continue to take slow, long, smooth breaths. Observe how your stomach continues to expand as you inhale and feel it deflate as you exhale. Now, as you continue breathing, silently think to yourself, breathe in. And as you inhale, silently think your cue word as you exhale. So for me, I'm breathing in. And as I exhale, I'm thinking peace. Slowly inhale and think, breathe in. And slowly think out your cue word, peace. As you do, notice your entire body feeling relaxed at the same time. Feel the muscle tension in your body being released as you focus on your cue word. Again, inhale and think, breathe in. And exhale and think your cue word. Notice your entire body releasing any muscle tension. Taking one more big final deep breath. And just notice what it feels like to think about your cue word in relation to how your body feels. Wonderful. So I have a sense that we're all participating wonderfully, which is so great. So feel free to take a couple more breaths and wiggle your toes and come back to the moment. And hopefully that was a really pleasant experience for you all. I see in the chat that Jamie says that they like the word catalyst, which is really great. I like that word. That means positive change and like breakdown of things. And I hope that when you are in a moment of distress, you can have some tolerance because you'll be able to connect with your cue word again. You'll be able to connect what it feels like to relax. Yeah. And thanks so much, Michelle, for participating. Wonderful. So that would be like an option for managing your distress, right? But it's interesting about distress is that when we're in it, we don't want to necessarily just forever sit in the distress and do nothing. We want to do something that can help regulate it. And if you actually think about it, going back to what dialectical actually means, dialectical behavioral therapy actually means it's a balance between change and acceptance. So what I mean by that is in life, we can either change things or we can accept them. And I know that seems really direct, like one or the other. It's like life is simplified, change or accept. If we can change a problem, let's do that. And coping is a form of change in some way because you are providing a decrease in the intensity of the situation by coping, usually, ideally. Or if we can't change it, we have to accept. And accept is sometimes that's where the mindfulness comes in. That's where the distress comes in. That's why Marshall Linehan was a genius of this idea of mindfulness building into distress tolerance of change and accept. All of that comes together in that wonderful package that we always have two choices, whether a problem comes up as we can change or accept. So I'm just going to continue moving on into our next section. Our next section is emotional regulation. So emotional regulation is this idea that our nervous system and our emotions come from our brain and whatnot. And there is this need for us not to have too highs and too lows, right? And what we want to try and do is have it to be a gentle stream of emotions, really well, like gentle waves instead of high highs and low lows. Jamie says that there's a balance between change and accept. I would definitely agree that. I don't think we can always just change things, nor do I think we can always just accept things. I think there's going to be a balance between both, depending on the situation, depending on your personal preferences or what feels best for you, the situation. So I definitely agree with that. It is a balance between the change and accept. In terms of the emotional regulation, so if you really think about it, a lot of times we go, if we have an uncomfortable emotion, we go, yucky, we don't like that, we don't want it, and we push it away. Instead, we need to first conceptualize emotions as just information. Emotions tell us what we like, what we dislike, what's comfortable, what's uncomfortable. If you really think about it, it drives our intuition of what we feel is right and wrong. It allows us to have a lot of clarity in what we should do going forward. It's our own guide for life. And even the uncomfortable emotions, we can say negative emotions, right? But they are in itself a lot of guidance for us on what we want to do with ourselves in the present moment and going forward, and allows us to know what has happened in a way that maybe isn't quite meeting our needs. So first, number one, an understanding of emotions, and then we need to regulate it. And what's also interesting is we have a difference between like primary emotions and secondary emotions. primary emotions from my perspective, and there's a bit of debate in the clinical community, the difference between the two, but from my perspective within the DBT, primary emotions are the emotions that are so strong and they come on really quickly, and they don't really involve a lot of thought or awareness that they're happening because they're happening so quick and we're already into that emotion. So for example, you win the lottery and the first emotion you have might be surprise. That might be a primary emotion because it's so quick and it happened so easily, right? A secondary emotion maybe of winning the lottery might be joy, because then once you're over the shock of winning the lottery, right, you might realize all the wonderful things that could happen from winning the lottery. So the secondary emotion could be happiness, and they might happen so quickly in a chronological time period. But it's important to understand that like we will have a mixture of emotions depending on anything that happens. And so that's also why it's sometimes challenging to regulate our emotions, is because we need to understand what are we even feeling in that moment. And it's also possible to feel a secondary emotion as a response to a primary emotion. So what I mean by that is, say you did something for someone else and you thought, okay, this is going to be really great, and you're feeling really happy about the action you did, but then you realize that that person didn't actually appreciate that action that you did. Then you might feel some guilt or shame as a secondary emotion, even though your primary emotion was like really excitement on your actions that you were going to do. So hopefully kind of makes sense a little bit between the two, but that's kind of just the way that DBT would also describe primary and secondary emotions. So if you remember, I was saying earlier, DBT goes off the same premise that what we think affects how we feel, and what we do, or what we do affects how we feel and what we think. It's all in a cycle, right? So within emotional regulation, the first step, again, awareness of what we're feeling. And now we want to pair it with an actionable thing that we can do to regulate that emotion. So again, it might be a relaxation exercise like we've done. It might be questioning how we're feeling. It might be journaling. It might be exercise, a good night's sleep, right? We need a lot to just feel well and to have our emotions be in a more balanced state. So there's a lot of different things. And I think one of the best things that anyone could do for themselves is kind of figure out like your recipe for wellness. Do you need a dash of this, a lot of that, or a little bit of that, right? And there is a lot of things that go into that emotional experience and to regulate our emotions. And so I think it's a wonderful gift if you can determine like what you need to be well. And over time, depending on the situations that are happening for you or your predispositions to things, your recipe for wellness may fluctuate over time, and that's okay. Like often clients will come to me and they go, I'm really good at managing my well-being, but like things have changed in my life and I don't understand why I'm feeling this way. And I'm usually okay. And I go, it's okay at times to not be okay. And it's okay to rediscover what you need to be well. That would be really reasonable. And it would be unreasonable to think that certain strategies are always going to be helpful for you, because we need variability and to try new things, or we may need more or less of different actions. I'm just checking out the chat, and Jamie says that I think it's important to remember that emotions are chemical cocktails and not necessarily true or false, right or wrong. Yeah, I think that's a really great mindful awareness. And that's also really stepping into the non-judgment space of emotions. Because if you think about it, happiness is a release of chemicals in our brain in response to something, right? And so sometimes our emotions happen and we may not really like what we're feeling, but if by judging it as worse or creating a judgment that the emotion is wrong, it can create more of a negative experience and just create like a worse situation. So I think that's a really great point, Jamie, because sometimes people, if we share emotions with others, they might judge us and go, well, that wasn't really a big deal. Why are you so upset? Right? That can feel really minimizing and hurtful, when really that their judgment of what we feel is not right or wrong. Like we're all entitled to feel our feelings, to have our emotional experience. And, like even like, for example, though, we could say, like, this is an example I used before, is like, if we're laughing at a funeral, right? It doesn't mean that we are really wrong. It'd be socially awkward or uncomfortable or unusual to do that. But maybe there was someone telling you a joke, and on the outside, people don't understand why you were laughing, right? So there's not necessarily a right or wrong emotional experience for anyone. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Jamie also says, I'm not my emotions. Totally. Like that's how we non-identify with it. Because imagine if I was like, I experience anxiety sometimes. So I'm like, I'm anxious. That's my name. I'm anxious. I do everything anxiously. Like that would be a very limited space to be in. I would not want to be in that space all the time. So yeah, it would be very like a bit of a tornado. So I'm going to pull up some skills here on some emotional regulation skills. So emotional regulation skills are skills that help you cope with your reactions to your primary and secondary emotions in raw and more effective ways. So I'm going to read that one more time because I think that's a really great statement. Emotional regulation will help you to cope with your emotions and your reactions to your emotions in a more effective way. So it's not that the emotion itself is wrong or bad. It's just sometimes a reaction or the outcome of that emotion is unhelpful. For example, anger. We feel angry and then don't do this, but say you punch someone, right? Like you're angry and you punch someone. That action of punching someone is really wrong. We can all morally agree we should not hurt people. And so that is what we want to regulate, that unhelpful action. But your anger that you may have felt towards that person is completely valid for whatever reason. So emotional regulation helps us to maybe kind of hone in on it so that it's not leaving us with unhelpful consequences of our actions or things that are really unhelpful for us. So for example, we can go into these kind of steps that we can do to help with us within our emotional regulations. So number one, to be able to regulate emotions, again, we have to recognize them. We have to overcome the barriers to healthy emotions. That means that, so clinically, we would say be able to hold positive affect. So positive affect is basically just means emotions or emotional experience. And that means that sometimes we feel like we shouldn't be happy, or we're not allowed to be happy, or we're not deserving of being happy, other positive emotions, etc. And so we sometimes need to break off those beliefs of why we may feel that way or whatever is stopping us from feeling that way. We need to reduce our physical vulnerabilities. So sometimes we may have some physical health challenges or different things that come up that make us more vulnerable to having emotional dysregulation. It could be a variety of things for that. We may need to reduce our cognitive vulnerability. So that might be our blocking beliefs. A blocking belief is something that we've usually learned somewhere, somehow, that says that we shouldn't do things a certain way, whatever way that may be. We need to allow us to have more positive emotions, increase our range of emotions, have it more of like a rainbow rather than just black or white. We want to be, again, mindful of our emotions without judgment. That's a huge one. We want to have emotional exposure. So what I mean by that is we can't just say, well, I have good emotional regulation because I never do anything. It's like, well, yeah, you probably would if you're never having any experiences. Like if we don't experience things, we don't feel anything. Like if I went and sat in a room that had nothing in it, and it would be very boring and I wouldn't feel anything. I actually might feel an emotional reaction of boredom, but other than that, we wouldn't have a range of emotions. So we need to have different experiences that have different emotional exposures. And that means that when we feel something, we have to allow ourselves to also feel it. And sometimes we also have to do the opposite of our emotional urges. So for, again, the example of feeling like really angry and that we want to hurt somebody, we need to do the opposite of hurting someone. We need to step away and really allow ourselves to feel our feelings without doing something that's unhelpful. And we also need to be able to do problem solving. Again, here's the change, right? We need to be able to find things that allow us to change the situation so that we can have more options and improve things. So there's a lot there, 9 things. But if you think about them, they're all similar and they all go within the balance of emotion, of change or acceptance, right? So again, within all of those are some wonderful, great opportunities to become more aware. And some questions that are really helpful is to ask us are like, what happened? Why are we feeling this way? Why do we think that situation happened? How did the situation make you feel both emotionally and physically? What did you want to do as a result of how you felt? And so sometimes individuals, again, like DBT is really great, but for individuals who suffer from borderline, those questions may be really hard to answer. But through the practice of mindfulness and being really aware and stretching your awareness to be present, right, it can really allow us to answer those questions more effectively and therefore regulate our emotions more effectively. And some more advanced of the skills would be like the problem solving. Sometimes it's really hard when we're in a tough situation to go, hey, this is what I should do. And this is a possible option. Sometimes we need to have other people support. Maybe we need to be inspired by different learnings, or we need to practice something new, all of those sorts of things. So feel free to ask any questions as we go along, but we've kind of so far gone over some mindfulness. We've gone over some distress tolerance. We've gone over some emotion regulation. So we're going to move along to the last section, which is interpersonal effectiveness. Interpersonal effectiveness basically means the ability to have interpersonal, so between, like, for example, myself and anybody else, the ability to have an effective either communication, relationship, interaction of some sort. So generally speaking, a lot of times, sometimes like we're very motivated to, because we're human, we're meant to be social and whatnot. We're become very motivated to change our behavior because of the impact our behavior has on others. Because we generally want to feel accepted, or we want to feel liked, or we want to feel included. So generally speaking, like individuals who suffer from borderline, they may attend therapy. This is just one reason, not all of the reasons, but they may feel very motivated to attend therapy because they recognize the impact that they are having on others because of their dysregulation or intense emotions that they may feel, for example. So inside of interpersonal effectiveness, skills are a composite of like social skills, right? So the ability of like how to communicate effectively. This may seem really like obvious, or might not be so obvious, but one person speaks at a time and the other person listens. Another one would be being able to communicate effectively, or being able to be really, again, the mindfulness piece in how the experience is happening for you. So there's a lot of different ones. I just see in the chat that Terry says, I like that you mentioned earlier a rainbow of emotions, because I do think that we're not forgiving of ourselves when we feel a range of emotions for acceptance or approval. I think that's a really great point. Like, I think it would be a very unfortunate experience of human existence if we only had very limited emotions. I think things would become very systematic. There wouldn't be a lot of creativity, or there wouldn't be a lot of acceptance or otherness or difference between people. And I think that it's really important to have approval or acceptance of our emotions. Like if we immediately push our emotions away and say we shouldn't feel this way, then we're just closing ourselves off to having more wonderful experiences or having a better understanding of ourselves. So I think that's a really great point. So I'm just going to bring up some skills here. Just one second. So one of the ways that we can have really good interpersonal effectiveness within relationships is to notice the difference between passive versus aggressive behavior. So a lot of the time we may feel restricted on how we can behave in relationships. We may feel like we're unworthy to bring up our needs or say our boundaries, or we may feel that we can't say what we want to say because we don't want to hurt anyone else. Or we may have just like different ideas that really block us. And so sometimes when that happens, it builds up and we end up being passive. So passive would be like not clearly stating what you need, and it would be doing it in a very gentle, indirect way. So, for example, it would be like, well, if you have time, it would be really great that maybe if we could sometime possibly hang out. It's very like non-concrete. It's like kind of like a option, but throwing it out there in like not in a very specific way. Aggressive could be like, well, you never hang out with me and you're so awful, right? Like very direct in a hurtful way. Ideally, what we want to do is recognize if we're communicating or behaving in one of those two ways and switch it towards a more assertive way. Hey, I would really like to hang out with you. When would work, right? So more direct. That would be an example of a really helpful interpersonal effectiveness skill. And another one would be is recognizing the difference between I want versus they want and the ratio. We all have wants and needs, right? So every relationship consists of two people trying to get what they need. It's very, like, to be very honest, we only hang out or spend time with people because we have something we both want, whether it's just the company, a good chat, to do an activity together, whatever the reason is. They're all great reasons, but we all want something out of that interaction. So sometimes they need the same things like companionship, recreation, calm, quiet, but sometimes they need something different at the same time. And so there may feel like a competition between each other's needs and wants. So for that to work, you have to, again, be mindful of the awareness and go, what am I needing? Right. So be able to know and say what you desire in a relationship, not necessarily just romantic, any sort of relationship. And then I want you to also notice and find out what the other person desires in that experience as well. And then you can be able to negotiate and compromise so you both can at least get some of what you need or want out of the relationship. And then you can also have a balance between the two. So if the I want, they want ratio isn't balanced, your relationship becomes very unstable because then one person is becoming really prioritized over the other person, and that person may end up feeling really resentful. Or the other way around, like one person is really competing and taking over because they feel like they're not getting enough attention. So within DBT, sometimes individuals struggle with that interpersonal effectiveness because there's a lot of insistency and urge and powerful emotions that are motivating them to have certain outcomes. And so it's really important to have like the balance between I want and they want and the awareness of that. And I always say to people, I'm like, when was the last time you, like, I know it sounds weird, but like, when was the last time you checked in with any friendship, romantic relationship, companion, work, social, whatever, and said, hey, how am I showing up for you in this relationship? Do you need something else from me? Can I do something different? Would you like to do something together? Like, like just a check-in and like just to check in on how your friend is feeling, because the more open and honest communication you can have, the more compromises are available, the more likely the friendship or the relationship will be healthier and last longer. And I think that's just like a really wonderful thing to do, just to check in sometimes, or just even saying like, hey, how are you? And like getting to know what their emotional experience is like. Jamie says that sounds like how love languages work. Totally. Love languages are more directed at like how affection is given and received. So it's the same kind of premise of being aware of each other's wants and needs in that same way. Love languages is more of the affection person. So it's like physical touch, affection, gifts, quality time, acts of service, and I can't remember the last one off the top of my head. There's another one, one more. So acts of service, I think it is. So those are, it is very similar in terms of like both being aware of what each person needs within the balance of the relationship. It's just one's more affection based, but again, it's still like the same idea. As you're probably going to realize over time, psychology all builds off each other. It's going to be a little trick secret I'll share with you all. Amit says, do you think it's possible to be too mindful in a way where it leads to rumination or overthinking? Well, I almost wish I could have an example of that, because I think like to be mindful is more in a present focused way. Like I think when we're ruminating, we're more fearful of the past, or fearful of the future, or we're resentful or feeling regretful or unhappy with the past. So I think that would be not quite the same thing. And if you're ruminating, then that means you're going around and around in circles. So are you really present in the experience that you're having in the moment? That would be my question back for that, and a little bit of a reflection on that. So no. I really love it when you guys ask me like straight questions. I'm like, yes or no. I get to feel like I'm answering all this stuff. So another one is the I want, I should ratio. So every relationship requires, again, the balance between seeking what you want to do and what you think you should do, right? So shoulds, I'm going to swear, it's like shitting on yourself. You're shitting on yourself. Like you're putting yourself in a situation that is really unhelpful, because you're putting up an expectation of yourself that may be really unrealistic. And many shoulds can become a controlling tyranny, and you're forcing them to ignore important needs that you may have. And so if you're overbalanced on the side of shoulds, how you should act, what you should do for the other person, the relationship will feel like a joyless burden, and you'll dream of escape out of that relationship. So for example, you feel like you should give everything that's asked of you in a relationship, even if it means putting your own needs aside. When someone is in pain, you should do anything required to help them. Well, that's a big should there. You should be caring and considerate all the time. You should not try to disappoint others. Like that's a lot of expectations, right? And so if you are noticing that some of those fit with you in certain relationships, don't panic. It just means that some of your beliefs are catered towards maybe people pleasing, or maybe you're not feeling like you're deserving enough in the relationship. So I would ask yourself, like, how can you maybe tilt the scales to be a little bit more balanced again? How could you allow yourself in some moments to be a little bit more of a priority? How could you maybe take a step back from the relationship and give yourself your own independence again? I would just maybe have some reflection around that. And I think that in like, for example, a client that I was working with borderline expressed that if a friend didn't text them back right away, they felt like this intense urgency to repeatedly text them until they got a reply. And that's just unfortunately one of the symptomologies, is like intense urges and emotions within borderline. But then they felt like they should get a response, or they should get things a certain way, and there forces them to like have a behavior that is a little bit incessant. So that would be good ones as well. Let's see here. I will see if we can pull maybe a couple more skills, and feel free to ask any questions. We just have a few minutes left here. So if there's anything in your mind, feel free to share. Okay. Sometimes it's also helpful to just keep note of how things are going. Like, I know we're all so busy and you're like, oh, great, one more thing to do. But if we are aware of how things are patterning in our relationships, we can have more understanding of, do we need to accept some things, or we need to change some things? So sometimes within DBT, part of the ability to build awareness and have more efficacy of these skills is to log them. So notice the situations, and then we can start to group the themes of how the behaviors are coming out and what you're feeling. I just see a question here that Terry says, do you think that lack of boundaries affects our shoulds, as you mentioned earlier? Yeah, totally. Boundaries are not just with other people. Boundaries are with yourself. This is why I don't eat ice cream every day, even though I would like to, because I have a boundary with myself that I should not eat ice cream every day in the summer. It's just a joke. But if we don't have boundaries with ourselves on how we want to show up in our relationships, then we're going to have a lot of shoulds. I should do this, I should do that. It's like, no, like, you're allowed to say no, which is a boundary within itself. And no is a complete sentence. So free to just hit people with a no sometimes if you need to. So yeah, it definitely affects it. So the way out of should sometimes is to go back to our value system. Do we value equity and equality and fairness? And if we do, then how do we have that happen more in relationships? Because we are all deserving of some balance. Yeah, Jamie makes a really great point here. They say, I like to think of it like being on an airplane, and if the cabin pressure drops, you put on the oxygen on yourself first, and you can't help anyone if you don't take up care of yourself first. That is a great point. How are you supposed to even breathe and help someone if you're not able to breathe first on your own? Like, how are we supposed to show up in relationships if we're not well? How am I supposed to show up as a clinician for my clients if I don't take care of myself, not eat too much ice cream, try and have social time, exercise, things like that, right? We need to prioritize our own well-being to be able to really have like great relationships. So I really like that example. It's a great one. And a lot of the times, I think like it's the way that we're socialized. I don't know about you, but when I was little, it's like sharing is caring, put other people first. And like that message was really driven home, but that was driven home in a really strong way on purpose, because as children, we don't understand how to be respectful within reason. So sometimes then we overshoot that, and then we really prioritize like others instead of ourselves. So we have to relearn as adults, like, okay, this is how I'm respectful. This is how I'm assertive. This is how I care for others, but still not like decrease my own well-being. Yeah, Jamie's hit me with the ice cream emojis. Yes, please. Feel free, anyone, to just send me ice cream, because that's like my favorite thing. But yeah, great questions, guys. I appreciate that. I wish Amit's gonna have to send me some emojis I can throw up on the screen then. And so those are the 4 different areas. So again, I'm just going to recap them. We have a few minutes left. So within dialectical behavioral therapy, there's 4 different areas. There's the mindfulness, is the emotional regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and distress tolerance. Those are the 4 pillars of DBT. And you don't have to have borderline personality to try it out. They're just really great skills. They're all really helpful for their wellness. This is one of my favorite books. It's like a green cover. It's a workbook. It's really great because it really gives a lot of different skills within it. And so you can teach yourself a lot of skills independently as well. You can just even Google DBT skills, tons come up. But yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed all that information today. I'll be here for a few more minutes if you guys have any other questions. But yeah, those are the different areas of DBT. Hopefully there was some helpful skills today. Hopefully you took this hour was for yourself, which is always great. So I appreciate that you guys put yourself first for this hour to have a little bit of a mindful mental health hour. So that's always good. And yeah, I really appreciated all the questions and comments today, guys. That was really great because it really creates a lot of community. And if you were thinking that question, there's a good chance that other people were thinking that question or comment as well. So, it's just great to show that you guys are showing up for yourself and others in that way. So yeah, personally, like I had started using DBT in my practicum of becoming a clinician with substance use clients. And it was really wonderful because again, like when there's a lot of deep emotion, sometimes there's the unhelpful consequence of substance use. Yeah, for sure. It is called so Jamie's asking the title of the workbook. It's called this is very original, but the Dialectical Behavioural Therapy Skills Workbook. And it's by Matthew McKay. Don't look at in the corner of my book. My puppy chewed that off. But yeah, so it's a green cover. It's really great. If you just literally search DBT workbook, it will come up in Google. It's like one of the best sellers for it. And I really liked it because it actually really explains things. And it's really nice because you can actually work in it as you go. And workbooks are a really great option. On our Switch research webpage, we have a lot of journals that go off the same premise as well, if you guys are looking for some supports too. Yeah. And yeah, thanks so much for your time too, guys. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you guys next week. So hope you have a good rest of your evening.